The senator yield.
I am happy to yield to the senator from Oklahoma for a question, but not yield the floor.
You know, I mentioned a few minutes ago when I was here last night, something was said, and I went back and I got some phone calls because people didn't believe it. And I think sometimes people like you, I say to my good friend Senator Cruz, who are living in this issue 24 hours a day, literally 24 hours on this day, that we may assume that people understand the significance of some things that they really don't. Because I got these phone calls last night when I was talking about, and I quoted our leader here in the United States Senate when he said that, that Harry Reid, Senator Reid, he said in the, a couple of days ago in the PBS Nevada Week in Review, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said, was asked whether his goal was to move Obamacare to a single-payer system, and his answer was yes, yes, absolutely yes. Now, I know I said this last night, but a lot of people didn't realize that because there's, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a few minutes here to kind of set the question up because I think it's important. As the occupier of the chair will remember, since he was in the other body when I was elected many years ago to the House of Representatives, at that time, I recall now, at that time, nobody thought that Republicans would ever be a majority of anything, the House or the Senate. And I know that would have pleased the occupier of the chair. And we, you know, it's kind of interesting because we became very good friends and yet we're philosophically apart from each other. But I observed four things. And this is something that I didn't think about this until this morning and how this subject fits in to this. I sat down at the time, the Republicans were totally insignificant in the House of Representatives. So I spent my time, I'd sit on the floor and I'd listen. And I observed some things, and I actually wrote a paper about this, and I'm going from memory now, but I recall in this paper, I said there are, in my opinion, four flawed premises on which Democrats' policies are based. And I listed those four flawed premises. They were the Cold War is over, we no longer need the strong military, the punishment is not a deterrent to crime, deficit spending is not bad public policy, and then the fourth one, that government can run our lives better than people can. Well, I kind of went through that, and I remember so well. I remember one time there was an amendment on the floor, and I know that those who were there at the time will recall this, that we were going to take some of these closed bases because of the cost of incarceration for prisoners. And we were going to take those and just take the fences and turn them around to keep people in instead of people out. Well, that made sense. And so I had an amendment on a bill that was a bill, and I remember that was a big punishment bill that became very controversial at that time. But I had that amendment to do that. And they defeated the amendment. And the reason they defeated it was they said, we can't expect our prison population to live in such substandard housing. And then I remembered, wait a minute, I was in the United States Army. I lived in that housing. I know a little bit about that. So that was kind of the punishment end of it. Then the end of the Cold War, you know, so we don't need the military. And a lot of them were saying, you know, we really need to cut back. And we did. We actually cut back. And Republicans and Democrats agreed on it at that time. But now it's changed. Because what we're doing now, I call it the Obama disarming of America. I can remember it and knowing, and I don't say that a lot of times when you talk about people as being liberals or conservatives, you're not name calling. You're saying, what is the involvement of government? Should a liberal believes the government should have greater involvement in our lives, a conservative believes that the government's got too much control and therefore we don't need to do that. Well, anyway, I went to Afghanistan when the first budget, 4.5 years ago, came out. And I stood over there knowing I'd get national attention, knowing that this would be the first step in what I call the disarming of America by Obama. And so I stood over there, and I recall in that very first budget, He did away with our only fifth-generation fighter, the F-22, did away with our lift capacity, the C-17, did away with our future combat system, which would have been the first advancement in ground capability in 50 years, and did away with the ground-based interceptor in Poland. And by the way, we're paying dearly for that now. Because we realize now with Iran having the capability that they have and our intelligence saying that they're going to have a delivery system by 2015, that we need to have something to defend that part of that coast. Then we went through, and of course, if you extend the budget of this president, it took $487 billion out of the military. So I just want to say that that is true. This is after several years, way back when I was in the House of Representatives. Deficit spending, not bad public policy. That's something that we've heard quite often and from some of our more liberal friends on the other side. But the fourth thing is, government can run our lives better than people can. Now this goes all, I tell my friend from Texas, this goes all the way back to the late 80s that this observation was made by me. And that is exactly what we're looking at today. A recognition by some people that somehow government can run this system better than people can. And last night, when I was honored to stand with my good friend from Texas, I recalled having been here back during the Clinton administration, and we had a thing called Hillary Healthcare. Now, that goes right along with the same thing. So a lot of people, my phone calls last night that I got after being on the floor with you, where people saying, well, I don't even remember that. I don't know we tried that before. And at that time, the big point here is they thought it was over. It was done. We're going to have Hillary Healthcare. And as Senator Reid said, yes, a single-payer system. This is what they want. And this is what they wanted back in the middle 90s. So we had Hillary Healthcare, and they thought it was over. They said, it's over, we're not going to win this thing. And consequently, you know, a lot of people actually believe that. And last night I talked about after we finally had victory, it happened that there's a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal by the AMA saying that we embrace Hillary Healthcare, because they thought, you know, they thought they're going to lose the thing. Anyway, that's kind of where we are today. At that time, they thought there's no way in the world we're going to win this thing. It's going to be, we're going to be able to defeat it because it's a done deal. And I think that's why I admire our good friend Senator Cruz for having the tenacity and to stay in here and recognize that we went through this once before. If we did it once before, we can do it again. Because the recognition, the reason that Hillary Healthcare lost way back in the middle 90s was that people realized that's socialized medicine. And again, you know, you ask the question. It doesn't work anywhere else. It doesn't work in Canada or in, you know, Sweden, Great Britain. Why would it work here? And the answer I know that they've never said, but they believe is, well, if I were running, it would. It's kind of a mentality that government can run our lives better than people can. And so I want to say one thing before I ask my question, and that is, I've had a great blessing in my life, and that's getting to know a great American whose name is Rafael Cruz. Rafael Cruz came here the tough way to this country and recognized from his past experience what real freedom is. I have some quotes here that I wrote down because I use these quite often. He said, our lives are under attack. ObamaCare is going to destroy the elderly, and by denying care, by even perhaps denying treatment to people who are in catastrophic circumstances. I hear people all the time say, this will never happen in America. It is happening in America. It is happening in America, and our rights are being eroded more and more and more every day. In one of his speeches he gave not too long ago, he said, I think the most ominous words I've heard was in the last two State of the Union addresses when our president said, quote, if Congress does not act, I will act unilaterally. Scarily reminiscent of how things were done in Cuba. A law that no Republican voted for is now the law of the land, governing by decree, by executive order, just like Cuba, the country he left behind. Now, this is Rafael Cruz, who happens to be the father of our own Senator Ted Cruz. And he's one who came over. He escaped the very overbearing power of government to come here for that reason. And so I look at that, and I remember one of the greatest speeches. I think I've said this often, and I know a lot of people don't agree with this. Probably the greatest speech I've heard in my life was Rendezvous with Destiny by Ronald Reagan. And in his speech, he tells the story of someone, it could have been Rafael Cruz, someone who is leaving, was escaping from communist Castro, Cuba, to come to this country and risking his life. And in this speech, Rendezvous with Destiny, Ronald Reagan said, and this is way back before he was, when he was governor of California, he said, the boat came out and it washed up on the shore in southern Florida, and there was a woman there, and he was telling the woman about the atrocities of communist Cuba. And when he was through, she said, well, we don't know how fortunate we are in this country. He said, no, we're the ones who are fortunate because we had a place to escape to. Now, doesn't that tell the story? You know, that was a government running everything, and they escaped that and came to this country and risked their lives, and they're over here. And I know that my kids, Kay and I have 20 kids and grandkids. I was listening to you last night when you were reading a bedtime story to your little kids. Ours aren't little kids anymore, but my grandkids are. And you stop and think, what kind of America? What kind of America are these kids going to be inheriting? Why is it popular now? Why was someone who believes government has should have a larger role in our life be reelected? What's happened to the American people and the values that we held for so many years so close to us? Well, that's a hard thing to answer. But I know there are several of them, people who have experienced that, leaving slavery to come to this country. And by the way, last night when I was reading the various things, I didn't have any of the statements from the people from Oklahoma, so I was reading from Louis Gohmert, who represents the eastern part of Texas. He had a lot of anecdotal stories from people in East Texas, just like Oklahoma, and we're not that far apart. But since that time, somebody called last night and they said, you know, you should be using stories from Oklahoma. Kay Matheson said, stand with Senator Ted Cruz, defund Obamacare. A single system health care provider system is nothing more than a socialist system. She's from Bethany, Oklahoma. Sue, I won't give her last name because she didn't want it given, but she said, thank you. What's to protect people from being victims of identity theft with all these so-called advisors having access to people's financial and health care records? Why aren't members of Congress, the White House, and their staff included? Well, they should be included. We've been talking about that. The senator from Texas has been talking about that. We had, in a Twitter that came in this morning, that said, what allows the executive branch to pick and choose who must follow Obamacare and what parts to enforce. So we've got a lot of that stuff. But the thing I wanted to bring up last night, one of the things was something really good is happening. We're talking about the bad things, but there is another opportunity. We've got a great guy in Oklahoma by the name of Scott Pruitt. He's our Attorney General. In fact, I tell my friend Senator Cruz that while he was running for Attorney General, I flew him around. Aviation is kind of my thing. And I was flying him around the state, and I got to know him quite well. And he told me at that time that he saw this threat coming. And so what he has done is he has filed a lawsuit, and I'm proud to say that through the courts, through the courts are leading the charge to dismantle Obamacare and put an end to its owner's tax. Just last month, a judge overseeing the lawsuit ruled against a motion filed by the administration to dismiss the case, which means the case will proceed. Well, that was a major obstacle. No one thought that he'd be able to overcome this motion to dismiss. So it's still out there. And the laws are train wreck. We know that. There have been several proposals to prevent further damage, and we need to defund the law. We need to make sure no additional taxpayer money would be used. Now, if he is successful, that will affect some 34 states who are in the same situation as Oklahoma. And if he is successful, that will pull the funding out of Obamacare, and it could be that just one guy in the state of Oklahoma will be responsible for that. So this is happening. Yes, all the efforts that are taking place here, and primarily by my good friend from Texas. But we're in Oklahoma, we're involved in this thing too, and we're hoping to be able to have have that opportunity. I want to mention one other thing, because this came in, and I'm going to read this, and it's a letter, and it's not all that long, but I think it's really revealing. It says, I cannot tell you how distressed I am with regard to the Affordable Health Care Act. This came from, her first name is Lynn in Oklahoma. This came in last night. The ObamaCare. I'm fearful for my kids, now 18 and 20. This is the effect it is having right now. Employers are not allowing their workers to have full-time hours. They are hiring more part-time workers to make up the difference for the companies, so they won't be penalized for not providing health insurance. Both of my kids are unable to get full-time employment. For a year, my daughter was able to work 40-plus hours a week. Then, with the implementation of the ACA, no one can work over 29 hours a week. Instant pay cut. My son, who just graduated from high school, finally found a job at a restaurant, and they give him 4 hours a day. He's still looking. Additionally, I have adult friends whose hours are being cut at UCOs so that they don't get penalized for not providing health insurance to their part-time people. Adults with families getting their wages cut. Now, this is just a normal citizen out there. This isn't a professional. This is what people are thinking, at least in my state of Oklahoma, and I think throughout the nation. Adults with families getting their wages cut so the employer doesn't have to pay for health insurance. Did you not think employers would find a way out of this at the expense of the American people? Is everyone in Washington so blind, or is it selfish? My husband's employer now wants to penalize us if I choose to stay on his health coverage rather than take the inferior health care package at my employment. Mr. Inhofe, I dedicated my life to raising my kids and taking care of my family. I currently make $12.25 an hour, and I have a bachelor's degree, and it would be senseless for me to pay for health care on a salary when my husband's health care is so much better, and I've been on it for the last 13 years. 13 years she's been on something. She has to give that up. He takes care of me as my husband. I should not be penalized for wanting to work full-time at this juncture in my life. If his company pushes the issue, I feel as if I won't be able to stay employed full-time, which is a violation of my basic human right. Now that my kids are grown, I need to want to work. At 52, it is highly unlikely that I'm going to make a wage that is going to allow me to pay for health insurance. It is against my constitutional right to enforce me to purchase health insurance I don't need. The law is unconstitutional and un-American. Please tell me what we can do. The American people deserve to be able to work full-time without being penalized. I'm tired of Washington and its dirty politics. Everyone in Washington should be held to the same laws it passes for the American people. Amen. Each one of you needs to have the same health coverage expenses that we have. I feel as if our country is headed at lightning speed for a major breakdown. What are you going to do to stop it, and how can I help? I'm frightened for the future of my children and the future of America, and I'm tired of D.C. politics. That was Lynn from Oklahoma City. This came in last night. I have several others just came in overnight, but I think the thing that people didn't realize was when we were able to talk last night about the fact that this has happened once before, and they came dangerously close to pulling it off back in the middle 90s. You know, I have to say this, that there's a brilliant strategy going on right now. I think I didn't realize this till yesterday. Are some of the pro-Obamacare people who are doing robocalls. Now, I know that the occupier of the chair knows what robocalls are, but a lot of people don't. These are automated calls where they call and a voice comes on and it gives a message. And people listen to that. Sometimes they believe it, sometimes they don't. Most of the times they do. So there's a robocall that's going on by the pro-Obama healthcare people that is going to the strongest opponents of Obamacare and trying to make people think that they're supporting it. It's to confuse the electorate. And when you stop and think of it, that's really pretty brilliant. And they did it. So all day yesterday, there were calls going around my state of Oklahoma by someone, and the message was something like this. This is Joe Smith. I'm with the ABC Tea Party. These are not Tea Party people, but nonetheless, that's how they identify themselves. Your Senator Jim Inhofe is supporting Obamacare, and you've got to call his office. This is what his number is, and all this. So we started getting calls, and people didn't even know that there are 14 of us who joined together with Senator Cruz about 6 weeks ago. And I was one of the 14 and one of the strongest supporters of his cause. And yet they're trying to make people believe something else just to confuse it. Frankly, it's dishonest, but it is brilliant. So when we're looking and we're seeing what happened, what is going on today, I do applaud my friend. I feel guilty, I have to say, to my friend Senator Cruz, because I left him last night at 10 o'clock. I went home, I had dinner, I went to bed, got up, and he was still talking. That's the depth of his feeling about this, and I really believe that what we learned, the lesson, if we can remember back in the middle 90s, the lesson we learned there, when it was all over, we had lost, but we didn't lose, because the American people came to our aid. And we were a minority at that time. They came to our aid, and they turned this whole thing around. That's exactly where we are today. And I guess my question to my good friend, Senator Cruz, is I believe that history could repeat itself. Do you?
I thank the senator from Oklahoma for his learned insight and for that very good question. And the answer, in short, Mr. President, is yes. Yes, yes, absolutely yes, to use, I think, the same phrasing Majority Leader Harry Reid used when asked if he supports single-payer, government-socialized health care. You know, I'd like to make 3 comments in response. Senator Inhofe's question and his thoughts that he has shared with this body. The first is simply a word of thanks, Mr. President, to the senator from Oklahoma. Senator Inhofe is an elder statesman of this body. He has served many years. He has earned the respect of his colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle and on the Democrat side of the aisle. And from day one, when Senator Mike Lee began this fight, Senator Inhofe has been with us on saying Obamacare is such a train wreck, such a nightmare, such a disaster, that we should defund it. And I observed earlier, it's one thing for the young Turks, the so-called wacko birds, to stand in this fight. It is another thing altogether to see elder statesmen like Senator Inhofe, like Senator Pat Roberts, like Senator Jeff Sessions, like Senator Mike Enzi, standing with us. That is significant, particularly when the leadership of our party is publicly urging Republicans to go the other way. I am grateful for your friendship. I am grateful for your steadfastness. I am grateful for the senator from Oklahoma's principled and courageous willingness to fight for the American people. And I will say it makes a real difference. If you trust what's written in the media, this battle is doomed. Indeed, I recall reading a day or two ago an article that purported to be an objective news story, not an editorial, an objective news story by a reporter allegedly reporting on the news that began with something like, the fight to defund Obamacare, comma, which is doomed to fail. And that was just reported as a fact. There's no editorializing, apparently, and that is just an objective fact. It's doomed to fail. And I will say the momentum has been steadily with us. They said this fight was doomed to fail 2 months ago. And then we saw the American people unite, and over 1.6 million Americans sign a national petition saying defund Obamacare now, because it is a train wreck, it's a disaster, it's hurting Americans. They said it was doomed to fail. The House of Representatives would never pass a continuing resolution conditioned on defunding Obamacare. Wouldn't happen. And then last Friday, the House of Representatives did exactly that because courageous House conservatives stuck their neck out and because House leadership in an action for which I commend them. Listen to the American people. And so now this week, the press says it's doomed to fail that Republicans be united, and yet I would note seeing elder statesman after elder statesman come down and support us indicates the momentum that is with this movement. And listen, this is not a movement by any one or two or three or 100 senators. This is a movement from the American people. Why are we seeing momentum move in favor of defunding Obamacare? Why are we seeing momentum for Republicans in favor of voting against cloture so as to deny Harry Reid the ability to fund Obamacare on 51-vote partisan vote? Because the American people are rising up and their voices being heard. So that's the first point I wanted to make in response to my friend from Oklahoma.
Before you make the second, yield for one follow-up.
I'm happy to yield for a question, but not yielding the floor.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't think I've ever been referred to as the senior statesman, but I kind of like that. And when you mentioned four of us coming down, he would put in that category. We have been here for a while. There's one thing we all four have in common. We all had a career in the real world first. You know, one of the problems we have that I've observed in people is, they'll people, what do you want to do? Well, I want to be a member of Congress. So they leave the fraternity house and they run for Congress. They've never been in the real world, and people would ask me questions. You know, what should I do if I want to get in politics? I said, go out for at least 15 years and live under this system and learn how tough things are out there. In my case, I spent over 20 years, did a lot of building and developing in the state of Texas, where Senator Cruz is from, and I've talked to his daddy, Raphael, several times about this, that I can remember there I was doing what Americans are supposed to do. I was making money, I was losing money, I was expanding the tax base, and yet the obstacle that I had all during those years was the federal government. The federal government. And here I was doing what Americans are supposed to be doing. And that's when I decided, I remember the last thing that we did down in Texas, I did a development, was a pretty good sized development. I had to go to 25 governmental agencies to get a dock permit. And I thought, wait a minute, they're supposed to be on our side. And so I decided I'd run for to come to Congress and try to save the free enterprise system. Now, that's what all four of us have in common. So we may have been here for a while, but we're here with a cause. We're here having experienced how abusive government can be. And I've not seen a time when the abuse is greater than it is today on what's happening to us. To think that we have a policy by the president, he's been able to sell the idea and get the votes to get it through, and now and it's socializing medicine, something that has failed year after year after year in every country where they've tried to do it. Does my friend from Texas see anything different about the United States of America, how socialized medicine would work here when it hasn't worked anywhere else?
I think the senator from Oklahoma raises a very good question, and the clear facts are everywhere in the world socialized medicine has been implemented. It hadn't worked. It produces results consistently. You can predict where socialized medicine leads. It leads to scarcity. It leads to waiting periods. It leads to poor quality health care. And it leads to government rationing. It leads to government bureaucrats deciding what health care you can get, what health care I can get. So if you go in for a health treatment, a government bureaucrat may say, Mr. Inhofe, you can get that treatment in 6 months or maybe a year. On the other hand, perhaps your mom goes in for a treatment. The government bureaucrat may say, ma'am, I'm afraid you don't get that treatment. We've determined on our schedule we're not allowing that. That's what happens with socialized medicine. If you want not to be able to pick your doctor, if you want a government bureaucrat making health care decisions for you instead of you and your doctor, then you should welcome what Majority Leader Reid says is the inevitable result of Obamacare, and that is single-payer government socialized medicine. That is where this law is headed.
Last time, for a question.
I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
And I hope my wife will forgive me, because I know she's watching, or I suspect she's watching, because she has an equal interest in this issue for a totally different reason. Kay and I have been married, our 54th wedding anniversary is coming up. We have 20 kids and grandkids. She went through an experience, and our whole family went through the experience with her just a short while ago, less than a year ago, where she discovered she had a serious heart problem. It is the aorta valve. And I have to praise her for not telling me anything about it. For 4 months, she knew she was going to have this very serious operation. And she's just a year younger than I am. She knew she was going to have to have the operation, and she didn't say anything because she didn't want to worry me. And she was writing things out about, what things would go to what kids and all of this, because she didn't think she was going to make it. She thought there was a good chance she wouldn't. Well, we went through that experience with her. And I'll tell you what's kind of funny. All of our grandkids call us, well, my name's Inhofe, so I is for Inhofe, so they call us Mamai and Popeye, okay? Well, that's what they have referred to us. And since she had a valve that was put in her heart that was from a cow, instead of calling her Mama, they call her Mumai. Well, anyway, she went through this very difficult thing. The best medical care. This happened in St. John's Hospital in Tulsa. The doctor, Robert Garrett, all the nurses, all the people, all the way down. And I was thinking, that's my first experience at my age, my senior age, of seeing this system work. Now, where would she have been in Canada? I've talked to some people, and they said, no, at her age, she would have waited in such a long line that she probably would not have been able to make it, because it was a serious thing she's going through. I don't think I'm the only one who's had this experience, but let me tell you, that was a wake-up call, and I would just hope and would suggest to the senator that other people speak up, even though it's somewhat uncomfortable. I just thank God that we had the system that we had here that allowed Kay and me to be able to look forward to our next 54 years of marriage.
Well, I thank the senator from Oklahoma for that excellent question, and I'll make several points in response. The first is hearing that story of your wife and her courage. And it reminds me, I will confess, I knew there was many reasons why you and I have become friends, why I like and admire you, and I've discovered yet another, and that it sounds like you and I married very similar women. If it's anything like our marriage, at least in my marriage, I married way, way, way above myself. But I'll tell a story that your story reminded me of, which is my wife Heidi was taking a car to the airport, and the car got hit by another car, T-boned. And the driver was very upset, and Heidi called 911. An ambulance came and took the driver to the hospital. And Heidi proceeded to call a cab and take the cab to the airport, get on a plane, and fly to a business meeting she had in New Mexico. And at the end of the meeting, she noticed, she said, gosh, I'm kind of hurting. My head hurts and my shoulder hurts. So she went to the hospital that afternoon in New Mexico and discovered that she had both a concussion and a broken collarbone. And much like you relayed, Heidi did not share this news with her husband until that evening. So she didn't call me when the accident occurred. She didn't call me even when she got the diagnosis. She called me back there, and she's describing. She called and said, sweetheart, we wanted to let you know, I had a car accident. I'm all right, but I do have a broken collarbone. I've got a concussion. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's very disconcerting when your wife tells you that. And she's describing where it happens, and she described the street in Houston. I'm like, well, wait, if it happened in Houston, what do you mean? What are you doing in New Mexico if you got in a car wreck in Houston? She's like, oh, well, I got on the plane and flew without going to the doctor with a broken collarbone and concussion, and went to the business meeting, completed the business meeting before bothering to get treated. Now, let me say to anyone watching this, I do not commend my wonderful, love of my life wife's conduct to anyone who has an accident. I would suggest getting medical treatment immediately, and I would strongly suggest not following the path of the senator from Oklahoma's wife or my wife and not telling your husband. I would strongly encourage, call your spouse and let them know. I certainly urge, should that happen again, to my wife, sweetheart, please let me know when it happens and not 12, 14 hours later. But, you know, it's the virtue of marrying strong women who know what they want and are able to tackle the world. And I, for one, am blessed. I have no doubt that you feel deeply blessed. And with 20 kids and grandkids, you know, the psalmist talks about, my cup runneth over. bountiful blessings, and 20 kids and grandkids certainly qualifies as that. Indeed, an additional point that I wanted to make is I wanted to thank the senator from Oklahoma for his very kind comments about my father. As the senator knows, my father's been my hero my whole life. I have admired him for as long as I can remember. And I will note something particularly meaningful that the senator from Oklahoma did, which is every week in the Senate, there's a prayer breakfast. It's a bipartisan prayer breakfast, which is nice. There are not a lot of bipartisan things we do here in the Senate. There are a number of senators who attend regularly, Republicans and Democrats, and they invite a different senator each week to share his or her testimony, share some thoughts. And some weeks ago, I was invited to do so. I felt honored to have the opportunity, and I've attended the prayer breakfast a number of times. And the way it typically works is another senator is asked to introduce whoever is speaking that day. So at the prayer breakfast, Senator Inhofe was asked to introduce me. And it's really quite interesting. You know, almost anyone, when asked to introduce someone, would do so fairly easily. Maybe they'd print out a bio to pick sort of a little biographical fact or two, but most people treat introductions as fairly routine efforts. And I'll tell you, Senator Inhofe didn't treat it that way. He picked up the phone and he called my dad. He picked up the phone and he called my college roommate. He picked up the phone and he called one of my dearest friends here in Washington, for whom Heidi and I are the godparents of their kids. And he called them totally out of the blue. I said, "Hi, this is Jim Inhofe. I've been asked to introduce Ted, and I was just wondering if you could share any particular stories." And they shared a few mildly embarrassing stories. Actually, I will give them all credit for finding the exactly right balance of stories that were just embarrassing enough, but not quite so scandalous that the blood drains from your face when they're told. And I will say that showed a personal level of consideration that's unusual in this town. And I appreciated that. I thanked the senator then, but I want to take this opportunity to thank the senator publicly for putting that degree of personal consideration to try to tell not just he went to so-and-so college and did this and this, not just the empty biographical facts, but trying to put a little color on who this individual is.